Ke akunui, ke akurahi, tēnā koutou. Ko Marcus Aku Hata-Brown tēnei, e mihi ana kia koutou kua whakarau ka mai nei I roto I tēnei whare taonga o tātou. Tēnā koutou huri noa I te whare ngā maunga, ngā mana, whakahi, e noho tahi mai nei tēnā koutou. My name is Marcus Aku Hata-Brown, and it's my privilege and pleasure to help facilitate this morning's proceedings. We all acknowledge, and I think that's a motivating factor to gather here this morning, that there is nothing more important than recognising, preserving and upholding the mana and tapu of our people by enabling them to live free from any form of violence. Improving the lives and well-being of our tamariki, of our whānau, families and communities through a new strategy to eliminate family violence and sexual violence is our kaupapa this morning. Also, in the interest of keeping all of us safe here this morning, I have a few health and safety matters to make sure that we feel safe here together. In the event of an earthquake, Te Papa, as you all know, is a very, very safe building. Please, if you can, get under the tables and then follow the instructions of our very qualified staff to keep you safe, and they will arahi, guide you to your next steps. In the event of a fire, we will evacuate out through the fire exits and assemble at the front of Te Papa. As we are all too familiar with, ensuring that we maintain social distance throughout the event is really, really important to ensure that we respect those parameters and boundaries in the interest of our safety. So can you please ensure that you wear masks if you move away from your tables? And note that Te Papa is a non-smoking venue, so vaping and smoking must be done on Willis Street, about 5 blocks to my right. Given the current restrictions that are present, not everybody who's invested a significant amount of time, heartfelt passion, resources, their talent, was able to join us this morning. And so through the awesome technology, there are hundreds of people, not only in Aotearoa, not only officials and technicians and all of the technical people who have poured their energy and time into creating this strategy, but whānau themselves who have contributed to this work, and people from overseas who are watching and joining us via live stream this morning. And I just wanted to also acknowledge them. Nā reira, kai au tēnā mō tēnei wā tonu, kei taku rangatira e kura, ka tukuna e au te rākau kōrero kia, me te rākau karakia kia koe, kia tūwhera ai I tō tātou nei hui te ata nei. Nō reira, e kura, tēnā koe.
Te pua o te kupu pai eretia ki te ono o te mea ngaro. Ake, kai ngaro I te aue. E tā uri kau ana ki a rātau kai ngaro I te aue. A koutou nei koutou kei runga mākere mai ana te korowai ki rungi a tātou. Nei koutou kei raro, maranga. A kei ngā tini ai tua huri rau nei te motu, mai te huku, mai te urunga mai o te rā, ki tōna tōene, ki te mātonga. Kara pene mai rā I te unga te kite, te unga te rāngona, o ti anora rātau, ka poroporo akina te pō, nau mai te awatea. Nau mai te awatea kei ngā raurangatira mā nau mai hara mai kei raro i te tā uu o tēnei ware a tāhua o te papanei. Kei raro i tō tātou tūpuna māu i tiki a tāranga nāna e i ake ana. Te ikanui, me tōna hitanga atura te irautanga o tamanu i tera. Hara mai, hara mai, hara mai. Koutou kei runga o matua rorohiko. Ka whiu e te matau ki roto i au koutou whare. E kukume mai ai ki te kaupapa tangata i te atanei, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou. E te pirimea tēnā koe. Kai ngā memo o te whare pare mata tēnā koutou. Kai ngā tumua ki o ngā tari ka awanatanga nau mai haramai. Ara, kai ngā raurangatira mā kai aku whanaunga o te moana nui ākiwa tēnā koutou e rarau mai nei. Tahuri kauwana tahuri kauwana ki tau pirimaunga, ki tō tātou kiingi a kiingi tū heitea puta tau te whero te tuawhitu. Ara, me tōna māngai i tai ake nei, ara ko koutou tētehi kiwai o te kete, ko tātou tētehi kiwai o te kete. Nō reira, kei ngā raurangatira mā nau mai hara mai ki te nei te ati awa e whakatau ki a koutou i tēnei kaupapa wakahirahira. Ara, kia rere atura te Aorerekura, kia whakaputanga atura ki te ao Marama nei. Nō reira, e te motu. Kia wakaronga mai rā ki tēnei kātu kōrera e au kate e nei momo mahi ki roti au koutou kāinga. Ki roti au koutou hapori. Ara, manaki, nā tamariki. Poi atura i au koutou whānau. Ara, koutou ngā tamatāne, kia tūrangatira ai ki te manaki, ki te poi, ngā tamariki mokopuna ngā whānau oki. Ka tira e nei kā tūmahi, ki te kura atura toho arangatira. Ara, kia haere kō kiritahi, ara ki tēnei kaupapa a te Aorerekura ki te ao Marama nei. Nō reira, kauri i te kumea ro tēnei te raukura, e mihi kauana ki a koutou e tau mai nei. Ko ngā tohu o te raukura he honore he korore ki te atua, he mau ngārongo ki te whenua, he whakaaro pai ki ngā tangata katoa. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou. Ara, ka te tiro atura ki taku whanga. A ka pūria nei e te hau, horo ia e te ua. Ara, mākere ana a kirungi a tātou. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou. Pūria nei e te hau, horo ia e te ua. Whitia e te rā. Mahia ke ngā poraruraru. Makere ana ngā here. Erere. Erere, wairua erere, ki ngā ao o te rangi, whitia e te rā. Mahia ke ngā poraruraru. Makere ana ngā here. Makere ana ngā here. Me oki atura ki ngā matu o te koro o te waiata nei. Wai hora i ngā pōraru ki te taha. Mākere mai ana te aroha, kirungi te ngāhere, kirungi a tātou katoa, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou. Kia ora tātou katoa. Kei tōku tuakana i te rangatira nei rātu mihi atura ki a koe Marcus. Kia ora.
I just want to take a moment before introducing our next speaker to acknowledge ministers who have gathered here with us today this morning. Minister Radhakrishnan, Minister Teneti, Minister Jackson, and of course Minister Davidson. Also want to acknowledge chief executives from the different agencies across government who form up the board of the JBVU. Thank you for your ongoing support and your commitment through your leadership to this important kaupapa. Our next speaker requires no really full introduction. Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern. But I would like to also note her commitment to child wellbeing and the obvious connection to today's kaupapa, and that we know that no child can be truly well in this country unless they are connected to well, thriving, loving, caring, nurturing whānau and the communities in which those whānau live. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my privilege to invite our Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern. Kia ora tātou.
Tēnā koutou katoa, te piku o te mahuri, te ra te tipu o te rākau. Nō tātou ēnei rākau e whakatipu. Can I acknowledge those joining us on live stream today? And also Minister Davidson and the group of ministers which have already been acknowledged, although I'll add to the list Minister Teneti and Minister Whāwhoi, who are here as well, lest they worry that they've been unceremoniously demoted by our introductions today. And amongst all of those ministers, those who have worked alongside them on our first ever national strategy to eliminate family and sexual violence. I also want to acknowledge Jan Logie. I also want to acknowledge Pru Kapua, the tangata whenua ropu, independent advisors, the specialists and community representatives who have walked alongside those in the joint venture to develop Te Aorerekura, ACC, the Ministries of Education, Justice, Social Development, Children, Māori Development, Women, Pacific People, the Departments of Corrections and the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet, and of course the police, and all of the chief executives and commissioners who are here today as well. Jan, a special acknowledgement of you for laying the foundation stones with which Minister Davidson has so heartily continued as well. It truly has been a joint collaborative effort. The attendance of everyone here today is representative of the collaboration that is required at every step if we are to eliminate sexual violence and family violence in Aotearoa, New Zealand. The main focus of my comments, though, is to simply say thank you to all those who have been a part of the journey so far, not least to acknowledge the journey that will need to continue from here today. But first, a couple of comments. For me, the measure of government has long been what you're able to do in spite of the challenges that come your way. Natural disasters, terror attacks, global pandemics. As nations, we are at times faced with disaster and tragedy. We rally and we respond to the best of our abilities. But we have a duty and responsibility to also keep making progress on those challenges in our societies that are deep-rooted and that often in times of crisis become even more entrenched. We must rally and respond to those challenges too. And we've seen this in recent times. For 2 years, COVID has been causing carnage around the world, and New Zealand has made the best decisions possible to try and protect its people, to keep cases and death at low. And while that has put us in the position we are now, it has been incredibly tough. We've had lockdowns and restrictions, and at the peak, we were supporting 2/3 of the labour force with the wage subsidy. Calls to family violence services increased. Demands on food banks increased. And while we put in additional funding and resource to try and support those services who are providing on-the-ground support and care, it was nevertheless a very difficult road. I want to acknowledge the steps family violence organisations took and the huge mahi to provide support despite enormous challenges over the past 20 months. From the outset of the COVID-19 pandemic, we made family violence and sexual violence services essential services, because that's what you are, essential. But we all know that not having people so close to the edge in the first place is where we can make the most difference in the future. And I know it's that prevention that motivates many of us. As Minister for Child Poverty Reduction, but also as Prime Minister, I take responsibility for lifting the wellbeing of our tamariki and their whānau to make New Zealand the best place in the world to be a child. On that front, we have a lot of work to do. And reducing the stress and strain, the impact of inequality and deprivation is part of that. We introduced the Child Poverty Reduction Act in 2018 to hold all future governments, and ourselves of course, to account on ensuring an ongoing focus on reducing child poverty. We're essentially poverty in whānau. We committed ourselves to halve child poverty in a decade. We've reduced poverty across all 9 poverty measures and exceeded one of our first 3-year targets. And we've done that through investment in working for families, lifts in the minimum wage, things like introducing measures to reduce period poverty, lunches in school, and of course welfare reform. And still, we have a lot of work to do. And that includes in the eyes of children. When we launched our first child and youth wellbeing strategy in 2019, we did so based on the feedback from thousands of young people. One of the 6 key things they wanted was to be loved, safe, and nurtured. They talked about the physical and emotional trauma caused by past events, such as experiencing violence in their homes. And so breaking the cycle of family and sexual violence is work we must urgently pursue. Of course, as you all know, in Budget 2019, we started with delivering the biggest investment to date in preventing and responding to family and sexual violence, but for good reason. 1 million New Zealanders are affected by this sort of violence every year, including 300,000 children. We also know that disabled people in our rainbow communities are particularly affected by this sort of violence. LGBTIQ+ adults are more than twice as likely as others to be victimised through intimate partner violence. Trans and non-binary people experience higher rates of sexual violence, and the risk of violence for our disabled communities is twice as high as the New Zealand average. Everybody deserves to feel safe and loved, and not just accepted but celebrated. Everyone deserves to be free from violence, and that freedom must be absolute, which is why the launch of this strategy today is so important. To drive the elimination of violence from our families' lives, to deliver a whānau-centred approach that focuses on getting in early, responding to crises, and ensuring long-term support from specialists. It's focused on prevention and addressing the drivers of violence, and an acknowledgement that the trauma that violence caused must also be addressed. The diverse communities of New Zealand have also been asking for appropriate approaches, techniques and services to address different needs. And I did know in the development of the strategy, the team have heard and acted on those requests. So that again brings me back to where I started today, and that is simply to say thank you from the bottom of my heart for the work that you do and that you've done to bring this strategy together and drive it forward. And thank you for keeping up that work throughout the past 2 years, despite the huge challenges everyone has faced. And now, let's keep going. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa.
Mima
rongo whakairi he kirunga, uruturu o piti whakamaua kia tina, tina huye,
Kaya wai te tupuranga o te kawa, kaya tāne ka tau te kawa ka tau ki tū, ke hoho te kawa. E ke panuku, e ke tangawa, hui e tāi ki heari ki he tauira. Heari ki he tauira, ka piki te pai tuatai, ka piki te pai tuarua, ka piki te pai tuatoru. E ke panuku, e ke tangawa, hui e tāi ki e o e rangi te pāmai rā, te o tēnei rautaki kōwai, ko te Aorerekura. Mō wai tēnei rautaki, mo te hora, orunga i te motu whānui tonu. Turu o whiti whakamaua kia tina.
tina.
Haue hui e tāi.
Kei ngā pāwhakawairua tēnā koutou, nau koutou i whakarewa ake tēnei kaupapa o tātou i te atanei, e mihi ana. Thank you, Prime Minister, for your words of wisdom and also for acknowledging that I maybe unintentionally forgot to acknowledge my own minister, who is awesome. And I want to assure you, Minister Whawhoi, that wasn't unintentional. I was, as they say, saving the best for last. And appreciate also your drive and commitment in support of today's kaupapa. Thank you very much, Minister Whawhoi. We'll now hear from the Minister who's been leading and coordinating the significant work that has gone into developing the national strategy to eliminate family violence and sexual violence. The Honourable Marama Davidson, Minister for the Prevention of Family Violence and Sexual Violence, is well known for her advocacy for human rights, equity, and the well-being of whānau. I've had the privilege, as many of you have, throughout the journey since the baton was passed to you, Minister. And not only have you acted in an incredibly professional, calm and considered way, your love for people, your commitment to see people's lives different and better and improved, I think is the driving and motivating force that has brought us to this point. E te Aorerekura, no te tai rāwhiti, no te tai toki rau, ka tū ake ahau ki te tuku mihi ki a koe. E te mineta nau mai, hara mai.
Tēnā tātou katoa. Kei a koutou e te ati awa. Koutou e kaha tiaki nei. Koutou e mau tonu nei ki te mana o tēnei o ngā whenua taurikura. Tēnā koutou e te mana whenua e te ati awa. Kura tēnā koe. Ka hatautoko ana hau i ngā kōrero kua kōrero tea. E ngā mihi kua mihia. E mihi ana. E te Premier, tēnā koe. O te rā koutou, ngā kai kōrero katoa, tēnā koutou. Tēnā hoki koutou e aku rangatira, e ngā ringa raupā, e ngā waiwai tāpā o tēnei o ngā kaupapa taimaharawa mō tātou, puta noa i te motu, mai kore ake ko koutou. Me mihi kātika, tēnā koutou katoa. Ka hore au e wareware noa ki tēnei o ngā whare. Tēnei o ngā whare, hei tāwharautia ngā taonga o nehe. Nō reira, tēnā koe. Tēnei o te raroa, ngā puhi me ngā tiparau e te whanaunga, tēnā koe, Marcus. E mihi ana. Huri noa, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. Oh, wow. I am incredibly grateful that you could all join me today to launch Te Aorerekura, and I have been waiting so long to say that name in public. It is beautiful. Our country's first national strategy and action plan to eliminate family violence and sexual violence. Thank you, Prime Minister. I know this means a lot to you, and you had the wisdom to appoint a first minister for the prevention of family violence and sexual violence. Of course, this mahi is extremely important and personal to me. I know, and I'm looking around here in the room, and I've managed to get to say hello to so many of you, and I know the hopes and aspirations that so many people carry for this work. I and many others are devoted to making a meaningful difference to improve people's lives. Te Aorerekura sets a collective ambition to create peaceful homes where children, people, families and whānau thrive, to enable safe communities where all people are respected. It will support the well-being of our nation and represents an evolution in our journey to address violence in our homes and communities. As I said, Te Aorerekura is a beautiful name for the national strategy to eliminate family violence and sexual violence, because aorere comes from a cluster of stars that navigates humankind to gain knowledge and comprehension. Aorere is responsible for ensuring the safe journey for her whānau as they travel across the celestial skies. Aorere transmits healing energy to restore balance and harmony to all aspects of a person's toiora or well-being. And as we all know, our efforts to eliminate family violence and sexual violence have been long and difficult. Reflecting on the name, I see Te Aorerekura as a light that will guide us all on this path to eliminate family violence and sexual violence. Te Aorerekura provides a vehicle that will support this journey for our country and people, and I want to acknowledge Brad Toterewa, Ngāti Naho, from Tuoho Mai Services, to reach Te Aorerekura as the ingoa for this strategy. Tēnā koe, tēnā koutou, Tuoho Mai Services, kia ora. The pathways for healing and safety are a priority within Te Aorerekura and ensure that the actions reflect the voices of whānau and communities. People must be supported to reach restoration and safety from violations suffered. I first want to turn to the government contribution, those in the joint venture of government agencies, my family violence and sexual violence ministerial colleagues, some of whom are here this morning, and at the risk of creating further storm, I'm not going to attempt to list all of them. Jan Logie, the former Parliamentary Under-Secretary, who brilliantly led this work before me, and everyone, I'm looking across here, so many people who I've had meetings with, we've had hui with, phone calls, emails. So many people who have contributed, critiqued and collaborated to make this possible at all. I also want to highlight the drive and contribution of tangata whenua, of the sector, of community and of advocates who have worked with and kept government to account to set out a strategy that is as strong as it is. You have all supported the significant public engagement on the strategy. We now have a strong foundation for our work together to enable people to thrive and be well. Te Aorerekura is the people's strategy. Specialists working with families have called for a national strategy for many years and have patiently walked alongside us to get to this point. Tangata whenua have brought mātauranga Māori and their leadership to this mahi and have pushed for a strategy that is tiriti-based. Through Te Aorerekura, we acknowledge that we need to address the intergenerational impacts of colonisation and racism in order for us to eliminate violence. Te Aorerekura references how the combination of colonisation, racism and sexism in Aotearoa increases impacts associated with the intergenerational trauma for wahine Māori. Consistently over the years, tangata whenua have been very clear that family violence and sexual violence are not traditional. Strengthening wahine-led, whānau-centred actions are the solution. Furthermore, te tiriti o Waitangi, mātauranga Māori and whānau-centred approaches are central to all of Te Aorerekura. They provide a unique perspective about how safety and well-being can be realised for all people. Te Aorerekura gives effect to te tiriti by continuing to build authentic relationships between tangata whenua and the Crown, with a focus on well-being, strengthening protective and prevention factors, and a focus on achieving equitable outcomes. Knowing that mātauranga Māori will enable approaches that better meet the needs of all people, I am pleased to announce today that Cabinet has agreed to establish a tangata whenua advisory group. The tangata, kia ora. Absolutely. This is an absolutely important and crucial step. The tangata whenua advisory group will provide independent advice directly to me as the lead minister on family violence and sexual violence. And this leadership input is an important and crucial improvement to the whole system and will ensure that Te Ao Māori informs our implementation of the strategy and that we are accountable to that leadership. I really want to thank the many tangata whenua representatives who have engaged with government on these issues in the recent years, including again, as the Prime Minister mentioned, Pru Kapua as chair, and all the other members of the interim Te Rōpū, along with the Rōpū that has worked with us over the past year to shape and name Te Aorerekura. We know that violence happens across all communities, ethnicities and classes, but it is a tiriti-based approach that will improve things for everyone. Te Aorerekura brings a stronger focus than ever before to prevention, healing, the role of tangata whenua and community leadership for achieving intergenerational change. It is through primary prevention that we will identify and address the systemic causes and underlying drivers that lead to violence. At the individual and whānau level, primary prevention involves strengthening individual and whānau resilience, including healthy conflict management skills, coping strategies, self-agency, and a hope of sense for the future. It involves building strong, positive cultural and gender identities and an associated sense of belonging. It also involves pro-social whānau and peer connections or support for new parents around child development and positive parenting, so children and young people are raised to feel loved, confident and safe. At the community and society levels, it involves building gender and social equity, shifting harmful stereotypes, and strengthening of social capital, cohesion, and inclusion, nurturing community participation and connectedness to promote healthy norms and support positive behaviour change. Te Aorerekura has drawn on the knowledge and expertise of many. the thousands of people who engaged with us, the specialists and advocates working tirelessly in our communities to support people to get safe and be safe, our public servants who have strived to improve systems, learn new ways of working and deliver advice to decision makers, tangata whenua who have said many times that these complex issues require Te Ao Māori approaches and Indigenous leadership, and those from ethnic communities, rainbow communities, disabled people, seniors, and everyone who has struggled to access support when faced with violence. I was lucky to attend a variety of our engagement sessions held with communities, and what struck me most was the commitment across the board to work with us to improve the system. We know that many of the solutions absolutely reside in communities where work is happening with and being led by whānau. Government must work with communities to support these solutions rather than obstruct or frustrate innovation. Government must also organise itself so that it is meeting its responsibilities to strengthen families and communities and towards well-being. Te Aorerekura sets out a framework to drive government action in a unified way and harnesses public support and community leadership. It will increase political and public sector accountability by setting out what we are committing to do and how we will measure and report on progress. The strategy includes a broad understanding of who is impacted by and who uses family violence and sexual violence. We have heard from many groups that they want more visibility, services and supports. Many of those affected by family violence and sexual violence, our experts and those who have been involved in developing the strategy are spread around the country today watching this event by live stream. Kia ora tātou. I thank you all and acknowledge the mahi you have done, are doing, and will continue to do to help people live free from violence. I really am sending my love and appreciation out to all of you, our sector, our community today. The generosity, I know, only exists because of the depth of commitment and dedication that you all have and the drive that you all have to see this work happen. We all know that I would very much have liked to have had everyone here with us today, but just know that we will continue our dialogue and relationship building so that we can work together to implement the strategy. I want to acknowledge also that today's launch comes at a time when many people are feeling the impacts of violence more than ever due to COVID-19. Family violence and sexual violence increase in times of crisis, such as a pandemic. Family violence and sexual violence, our current situation reinforces why, more than ever, our collective efforts must be focused and well coordinated. Family violence and sexual violence are an intergenerational issue, so require long-term generational solutions. Launching Te Aorerekura marks the start of a longer journey. We have been purposeful in creating a 25-year strategy because we need sustained focus, investment and commitment that goes beyond parliamentary terms. Te Aorerekura is evidence-based and comprehensive, and our action plan for the initial 2 years sets out 40 actions to achieve the shifts, the changes required. The 6 shifts set out in the strategy are designed to create the transformational change that we need. These include shifts towards strength-based wellbeing, mobilising communities, skilled, culturally competent and sustainable workforces, investment in primary prevention, safe, accessible and integrated responses, and increased capacity and focus for healing. Among the priorities for our first 2 years are a system-wide investment plan so we can coordinate and target a range of responses and activities to reduce harm sooner, integrating community-led responses so we can continue to learn and test what works if harm does happen and then roll it out, continuing to engage with communities to support implementation and build shared understanding of how we will work together, establishing the Tangata Whenua Advisory Group to help guide and lead us, and supporting our workforces with the right tools and resources so people with the right skills are available at the right time. All of these actions will help in achieving our vision, which is all people are thriving, their well-being is enhanced and sustained because they are safe and supported to live their lives free from family violence and sexual violence. We all have a part to play to enable the changes necessary, and it is a deep and great honour to launch Te Aorerekura, the National Strategy and Action Plan to eliminate family violence and sexual violence. Ko ngā mea nui e rua o tō tātou mahi kia hau, ko te whanaungatanga me te kōrero pūrākau. Pērā i te kākano ka tupu i roto i tōku hinengaro, ā ki roto i tōku whatu manawa anō hoki. The most valuable aspects of our work are the connections, are the relationships, are the stories told. These stories get planted in our mind like a seed where they grow and inspire passion. Nō reira, e te iwi, e te motu. E tātou katoa, nōku te whiwhi, te tū kei mua ia koutou, ia tātou i tēnei ata, ki te whakamana i tēnei mahi. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, kia ora mai tātou katoa.
Te Aorerekura has become so important to me, not just in my ministerial work, but the personal connection to this kaupapa has always been a priority for me, whether I'm an MP or a minister, or just as a wahine Māori mama, grandmother. We all want to create a world where we can feel like our tamariki and our mokopuna, that everyone is safe. And of course, I've often spoken publicly about my own experiences of living through and dealing with family violence, sexual violence, harm, and what that can do to people.
I have to say, it was hard, and going in there with preconception ideas of how mainstream operate. And the exciting thing was that once we had worked it out, that we could get away from mainstream and actually be who we are and dive into our own puna and come out with the answers. Well, that's where Te Aorerekura could have come from. It became exciting and it became empowering. And once we realized that, we thought, holy hell, we can actually be ourselves. We can plant a seed and water it and let it grow.
That we need to start focusing far more closely on our little people, on our children. We need to be teaching them about what empathy is and what compassion is. It's very, very hard to hurt somebody if you feel empathy for them. So I think that's an important priority. We need to make sure that we have an equitable approach across the country and across services. We know that we have service gaps still, and we need to eliminate those service gaps. And I think probably the other sort of priority for me is we need to be working in genuine partnership with government. We can't keep operating in an us and them model.
So the key measure of success in terms of the strategy will be seeing how the feedback and the recommendations from the victim survivors that Backbone heard from are incorporated into the action. So many victim survivors said in their feedback that the strategy was just more words, and that's not what they need. They need urgent action now. So key action in areas like the support and services that are available, the justice response, the way that offenders and the system is accountable to victim survivors, and also in the prevention of violence and abuse in New Zealand, so through education and awareness programs. So it'll be really important to see those things represented in the actions and how the government makes itself accountable in the strategy so that victim survivors can go back and hold the government to account for meeting those priorities or not. And then how victim survivors will be able to be involved in the continual evolving nature of the strategy going forward. That's going to be critical.
The experience of this consultation was, to me, quite unusual in that we were empowered as communities to be able to engage. Government did work with us to make sure that we were able to reach people and also facilitate these conversations in some really safe spaces. These conversations are difficult for most people to have in kind of group settings, and the addition of being part of the rainbow community or being part of the trans community, having those conversations in safe spaces was a really important thing for our communities.
I'd like to ask the question, why don't they? Because I think quite often the community is asked is, why should government do this? My question is straight, the answer to that question is, why doesn't government do that? And that's the answer to that question. And it's a very blunt question, because the people that are in government actually belong to that community. And they are not absent or separate to the community they are in. For some reason, there seems to be this invisible line. When we talk about government, we're talking about an invisible people and entity. But in actual fact, when our people in government and within those offices behave as part of the community, we might see change.
So when we say all New Zealanders, this is a shift to a system that works for everyone and instinctively and intuitively includes tangata whaikaha Māori, deaf and disabled people, adults at risk, their families and whānau. So a system that offers disabled people choice of either mainstream specialist services or both through equitable funding of twin tracks with no wrong door.
Racism requires changes in multiple places, you know, so we do need a much more holistic visibility and approach to really address equity, you know, and to have a system that is just for everyone, you know, and inclusive of everyone.
You know, often we have conversations amongst ourselves, and even say I'm having a conversation with a friend that the conversation steers towards relationship, and we often laugh because we often quote relationship is only everything, and I'm not talking about just the relationship between government, Crown and Māori. What I am talking about is the relationships within government. So let's say, you see how your ministers treat their DCs, and their DCs, you know, it all filters down. So, you know, social transformation actually starts with individuals. And so when we have everyone on that hierarchical tier, treating everyone with respect and keeping everyone's mana intact, then we might have a chance of really embedding what it means to be in relationship. So what I'm saying is that they have to start with themselves. And then, you know, hopefully they'll be able to extend that out and meet whānau in that same mana enhancing relationship that we all desire.
Tēnā koutou te whanau te whenua, tēnā hoki
Ngā te poneke e ngā whakatutunga o te hinawanawa tēnā rawa atu ki a koutou katoa. Tēnā koutou. Ladies and gentlemen, that brings our proceedings to a conclusion this morning. Would like to invite you following karakia to join us for kai this morning. Nā reira, māku tēnei hui ngā e whakakapi i te karakia. Unuhia, 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 tūru tapu nui a tāne kia wātea, kia Marama, tana koe te tinana te wairua i tāra takatū. Ko iara e rongo whakairea ke kirunga. Kia wātea, ai, ko wātea, haumi e, hui e, tāeke. Taumaha tini ki runga nei, mano ki runga nei, hāki raro nei, miti ana mai, kai ana mai, whakapakara ana mai. Ko kōkuna ka kai ka whiu ka mākona te rautanga te e, haumi e, hui e, tāeke e. Kia ora tātou. Dismissed.